welcome to the studio review for Chapter 9, Repeating with Loops. We are going to look at a fun little exercise where we put a bunch of dinners together for our astronauts. And we have all these different categories of food. We have protein, grain, vegetables, beverages, and desserts. And so we're going to need to make it so that we can, make as many meals as are needed, and each one of them should have one item from each of these categories. So for example, if we need one meal, we would get chicken, rice, peas, juice, and apple. If we needed two meals, we would get that one plus a second meal that was pork, pasta, green beans, milk, and banana, and so on and so forth. We could have up to 6 meals because we have 6 ingredients for each category. And so we're going to go through and use loops as a way to build these meals. And once we do it ourselves in sort of a static way, we're actually going to allow user input to specify the number, and then we can, make a different number of meals depending on what the user wants. And then we will do a bonus mission eventually where we're generating a password by looping over some strings. Let's focus first on this meal assembly. We need to take a look here at the code. So in VS Code, when you're in the repo, you can go to the loops directory and go to studio, and you'll see several files here. Index has just a quick call to the run program function from shuttle management, which is just a variable they created here that represents the solution.js file. That's actually where you need to write your code. So if we come over to solution.js, and I'll double click on this so it stays put, you'll see at the end, they've got this exports here where they're exporting a bunch of things. That's so that not only can they run the program from index, but they also have access to a bunch of the information and the other functions for the spec files in here, so that there's actually some unit testing. You won't learn about unit testing to write them for yourself until chapter 14. But for now, you can at least use the tests that are already written to test your code after you write it. So we do have a package.json file here, and you know what that means. That means there are dependencies that need to be installed, specifically readline sync and jest. We are going to make use of readline sync in order to get user input. So we need to go ahead and you'll see I'm already navigated to the loop/studio directory here. So I'm already in the directory where this package.json file is. That's important. So from here, I can say npm I, which is short for npm install, and we'll see it's going to install those dependencies. And we're going to see the package lock file show up here, and also the node modules folder. And there they are. Okay. And they're grayed out because I actually have them being ignored in my getignore file so that I don't have to worry about committing them. Okay, so we've got what we need now locally to be able to run the tests and also to be able to get user input. So we can move on to the code. There's a lot of comments in here, you may have noticed, especially down here, they have all the places where we can use some code they've already written to test the functions that they created. You do not have to know how functions work in order to use these. You just need to write your code inside of them and then run it, and it'll do the rest. So we're really just going to start at the top here, and it says, we have some arrays that need to be populated. So we're going to need to get these arrays of elements here, these strings, and copy each one. So I can just copy it here and come over here and replace that array there with the one I copied. And then same thing here, we'll get all the grain options and replace this one. I'll get all the veggie options and replace this empty array. We'll do the beverages. And of course, last will be the desserts. Save the best for last. Okay. So now we have all 5 of these initialized to hold these different elements. And each of them have, 6 strings. So this meal assembly function that will take care of everything for us is pulling in each of these, and we're going to just go ahead and compose a pantry that is another array. So this is a multi-dimensional array, right? We have an array of arrays. And the pantry holds all 5 categories and all of their elements that they contain, all the different strings. So that's going to let us go through, the entire pantry and kind of loop over that to look at one category at a time. And then we can also loop over each of these individually to look at one string at a time. That means we're going to need a loop inside a loop. So that's going to be an interesting challenge, and but it's an important thing to grasp. They also give us an empty array here called meals. Let's go read these instructions. So they tell us that the meals must include one item from each category. I kind of explained that already. And each ingredient's used only once, and you want to add each meal to the meals array once it's assembled. So this meals array that's empty now should not be empty by the time it gets returned from the function at the end. So in between is where we need to loop over the pantry, loop over the ingredients, and create those meals. Let's go ahead and get started on this. The first thing we want to do is set up the loop. So I'm going to just let I equal 0, going to do a classic loop here where we just start at 0 because we're going over arrays that are 0 indexed. We want to start with the very first index. I'm going to say, continue looping until you get to the number of meals. So right now, I'm not really concerned with looping through the pantry. I'm more concerned with, how many meals are we supposed to be making? So I'm going to just, increment each one here, and then we'll just loop as many times as we need to for the number of meals we're making. Okay. And then I'm going to create an array that's going to hold all of the items for the current meal that we are, putting together. And every time we come across one of these strings in one of these different arrays that's held in the pantry, we will grab, one of those items and push it into this array here. So we need another loop because now that, we're going to go around as many times as we have meals, but now we need to actually go through the pantry and look at these different categories, right? So I'm going to say, let j equal 0 so that we can start at index 0 for the pantry itself and look at, each of these categories one at a time. And so we'll say that j is less than the pantry.length. So what this is saying is loop on this one for as many indexes as we have inside pantry. So, and the length is always 1 greater than the last index, right? This has 5 things in it, which means it has a length of 5. That means it goes from index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we want it to go all the way up to 4, but not to 5. All right, and then j++ so that we can increment by 1 on the inner loop. All right. So we'll say, let's push, we're going to push one of those strings into it, right? So the question is, how do we access that, chicken in the protein, right? Currently, let's say we're on the very first outer loop, I equals 0. And then we get to j and we're looping through, and now we're in the pantry. So we're looping through the pantry, and j is 0. So we want to go to pantry at index j to get to protein, right? So this is pantry at index j right here, this entire thing. So then we want to go inside of this and access the element that's at index I, because now we're just looking at the number of meals, however many meals we're doing. So this is going to be a little bit backwards than what you might expect, but we're going to go to the pantry. We're going to go to the array that's at index j, and then we're going to go to inside that array and go to the string that is at index I. And that way, every time we, loop back through, we're going to have a different combination of j and I. And so it'll be able to pull, it'll loop through the pantry and go through each one of these and pull protein at index I, grain at index I, veggies at index I, beverages at index I. That's why this one has to be second, because we want the exact same index here for each one of these, even though we're moving through these by using J to go through the pantry. Okay, so every time we go and we get one of those strings for one of the things that's in the pantry, we'll push it into the current meal. And then when we get done, we can go to this meals array here and push the current meal. Okay, so all of that takes place for one meal. And then we increment I up to the next one and say, okay, so if I is equal to 1, now when we loop through the pantry on the inner loop, we're going to be going to protein, grains, veggies, beverages, and desserts, but we're going to be using index I here. And when it's 1, it'll be pork, pasta, green beans, milk, and banana. And then once that meal has been put together in current meal, we'll push that meal in, and now meals will hold, 2 different meals, right? That's the idea. We keep doing that up through, however many meals we have. The other thing to think about here, this was something that I wasn't clear on when I was a student, is, is it okay to say let here over and over and over again? And the answer is yes. If you have a variable that you want to be scoped inside a loop, you don't need it to exist outside the loop, then you need to declare it with let to make sure that it is scoped to this loop. That's actually important, because otherwise it could just be accessed from anywhere and that could get messy. So we want to say let, and then every time you come back around, it's going to redeclare and reinitialize it and start from scratch so that you can build a totally new meal every time you loop around on the outer loop. So this is absolutely the correct way to handle this, because it'll be empty each time, and you can start over and go through a different element from each of these that are inside the pantry. Okay, so we do all of that, we push all the meals that we want into it, and then we return meals here. And, this is going to get taken care of by other code in other places. It says here, to test your own solution, you can scroll down to the function called run program and uncomment the lines concerned with meal assembly. So we can come down here and do that. You can see right here on lines 54 and 55 now, I've got these 2 that can be uncommented. So we can go ahead and run these. There is one issue. This is just the definition of a function. And I know you don't know about functions yet, and that's totally okay. This does not automatically execute just because it's defined here. It actually is executed over an index where it's been called here by referring to that file and going and getting it. So this is the one that actually needs to be run, is index.js. So they have a mistake as of today anyway. They may have fixed it by the time you get to this, but as of today, they've got a mistake here where it says to run the command node solution. That actually will not work because there is no executable code in solution. Solution just has definitions. We want to node index. So we can do that. We can come down here to our loop/studio folder and say node index. And look what happens. We get 2 meals, chicken, rice, peas, juice, apple, and pork, pasta, green beans, milk, banana, exactly what we expected to get. And one of the key reasons that we got 2 meals is because when this function was called here, they passed in the number 2 as the number meals. And that's where that came from. We were using that as the basis on which to know how many times to loop around, how many meals to make. That number came from this function. And so, if we change this, let's say we wanted to make 4 meals, we could change that there and let this function take that value in, and our code should still work. And this time it should create 4 meals, and it does. All right, so we get chicken, pork, tofu, and beef. So you can see that it actually was, continuing to go down and make additional meals with all of the ingredients from these 5 arrays here. Okay, great. Let's look at the next part. All right, let's say we wanted to actually ask a user how many meals they want. And so we can make it kind of a variable. we can do that. So we're going to update some code in ask for number. And it tells us we should use a while loop to ask them for the number of meals. The reason we want to use a while loop is for validation purposes. We can validate and make sure it's an integer that goes from 1 to 6. If it's anything else, we're going to have to ask them to try again, because we can't work with a number that's anything other than 1 to 6. Those are the possible number of meals. So let's come over and take a look down here. Ask for number. We have part of it's already done for us. They're saying we're going to get the number of meals from the user. I feel like we really should have this scoped locally to this function. Scope works for functions the same way it does for loops. So I'm actually going to add a let in front of this just so there's no confusion, because we also are working with num meals up here that's local to this function. And we don't want those to, there's a issue called variable shadowing. We don't really want that to be a problem. So I'm going to say let num meals, and then here we'll add our while loop. And we're going to say while, this and this and this, and then, then we'll ask again and say something a little bit different, like, please enter a number from 1 to 6, just in case we get something other than that. Okay, so the thing we really have to think about here is the logic, right? How is it that we're going to determine whether or not we need to ask this over and over again? The first thing is, what if it's not a number? We can use this handy dandy built-in function called isNotANumber that will just evaluate it. So we could say, let's go and see if it's not even a number in the first place. Or what if num meals, it is a number, but it's less than 1? Or what if num meals is a number, but it's greater than 6? Any of those 3 conditions could be true, and that would trigger this while loop to ask again. And this time to be very specific and let the user know this is why we're asking again. We need a number from 1 to 6, because here we just kind of had an open-ended question, right? So now we're being a little more specific. Okay, so we can test this by coming down here in part B and uncommenting this. And they've got a variable here, let meals for X. They go and they call the meal assembly and they pass in ask for number to go get what that number should be, and then pass that along to the first function we were finishing, where it's then going to use that number coming in from here to determine how many meals to make, how many times to loop around. So let's run this and see how it works. And we're going to test our validation too. We need to test that. So I'm going to run it. We still, get the first one, but now we get the second question. How many meals would you like to make? And I'm going to say, 5. And we get 5 meals. Perfect. Okay, let's run it again. And this time I'm going to test what happens if we have something that's not even a number. What if I just give it, 7 as a word? Then it prompts us and says, please enter a number from 1 to 6. Let's say I'm really not paying attention and I say 0. It asks me again. Let's say I say 8. It asks me again. But then if I satisfy it and give it a number, 3, that's between 1 and 6, I get my 3 meals. We have exited that while loop and it continues on. Okay, so this is a very common way to use a while loop, is to take validation so that you can keep your program running. You don't have to exit the program and have them start all the way from the top. You can keep working with them to get the right answer and then only move on once it's something that's valid. All right, let's go to this part here. It says, we've been running the program with node index, but what if we wanted to run the tests that are built in, where LaunchCode actually has a way of checking out the code? We can do that with npm test. So I'm going to run that here, and this is what's going to use that just dependency. And there we go. So it has run 6 different tests to make sure that all of the arrays have been initialized, and that our meal assembly function actually produces the correct number and size of meals, depending on what number is passed in. If you're curious about those tests, you can go and you can look at this file and, see how that's set up. We're going to learn how to do this in chapter 14. So don't worry about that too much if you don't want to. That's fine. All right, last part is the bonus mission. So you are going to have a way to generate a simple password that's going to take two strings and combine them together by alternating the characters, and then save that combined string to a different variable. So they give some examples here. If string 1 was 1, 2, 3, 4, and string 2 was 5, 6, 7, 8, then the output would be 1, 5, 2, 6, 3, 7, 4, 8, because it's alternating back and forth, taking the first characters from each, the second characters from each, and so on. So let's go write a loop to handle this right here. And we start out with an empty string. They went ahead and did that for us. Let code equal empty string. And then here, we will do a for loop. And we're just going to make the assumption that the two strings will always be the same length. So it doesn't really matter which one we choose to choose the length as a basis for how long to loop. We'll just choose string 1 and assume that they're both going to be the same. And that way it'll stop looping when we get to the last character by doing it this way. So we're going to take our code and this is called string building, when we start out with something and we build it a little bit at a time. So we're going to build our string by taking the empty string that's been declared up here and initialized, and using the compound assignment operator to add to it. And I'll say, I want to go to string 1 and get the character that's at index I, and then also go to string 2 and get the character at index I. And then we'll loop back around and it'll, have a new index, and it'll get a character from string 1 and the character in string 2. And it'll just keep going like that until it reaches the end of that string. And then it's got all those characters added together, and when it returns the code. So we can come down here and uncomment this, and we need to provide test strings for it. So you can see they've got a bunch of different examples here. Let's use this last one where they've got, I guess I could have done, oh yeah, that's fine, this will work. Loot and Oku with an exclamation point. Okay, they're both four characters long, which means this loop is going to run 4 times. And we should be able to, get them one at a time. And if you're looking at this hard enough, you already know where this is going. But we're going to console log a sentence, and then, it'll make a call to the generate password function here and pass in those 2 strings, password 1 and password 2, that we just finished initializing here. And when it receives that as string 1 and string 2, it'll go through our little loop and then return that code. And that should be the code that's returned is what gets put into this placeholder here. Okay, so let's do it. Let's run it. I'm going to say node index, and we have to get through the meals first. Let's make 5 meals. Okay. All right, now we get to the end. Time to run the password generator so we can update the menu tomorrow. The new password is lookout. Okay, which is exactly what we were expecting to see. All right, that is the studio. Hope you had a good time. I will see you in the next one.